Well, a very warm welcome to NSF's series of webinars specifically related to GMP remediation planning, execution, and making sure that you've got exactly the resources, the knowledge, the expertise to survive your next regulatory inspection, because everything's changing. You know, the world has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And my name's John Johnson. I'm Vice President at NSF Health Sciences, and I'm going to guide you through some slides here that's going to give you some key insights on what's changed, why it's changed, how the regulatory inspections are going to change in the future, with some really good tips on how to prepare for this. You know, failing to prepare, prepare to fail. So we're going to make sure that you've got an insight into what's going to be high priority, high impact, and high interest over the next 12 to 18 months. So many of you will know me, of course. Worked now at NSF for 8 or 9 years on the back of nearly 30 odd years in quality positions, both at site and corporate level for a variety of multinational companies, some contract manufacturing organizations, and some innovator companies. And the majority of the work that I've been involved in or led is around business transformational projects, getting ready for regulatory inspections, responding to regulatory inspections, making sure that people have the right level of leadership, the right visual leadership at operational corporate level, and essentially making sure that quality culture, quality behaviors run right the way through multinational organizations. But let's talk about the future. Obviously, over the last couple of years, there's been an awful lot going on in the world. You don't need to hear that from me. We've all suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic. We've all suffered from the various restrictions and pressures and challenges that have come from government policy. And of course, we're all trying to adapt and be agile, responding to the various requirements of our regulatory bodies. So what's going to change or modify your approach to ensuring that your site is prepared for the future? What are the likely hot topics that are going to keep you up at night? What's going to be the things that you want to prioritize your time in so that your staff, your subject matter experts, your departmental leaders are working on the right things at the right time for the right reasons? You don't have time to work on the low priority items anymore. So let's make sure that you know what's coming down the railway track. I'm also going to talk about some tips for tackling some of those difficult questions that you're going to have ahead of you, whether that's on vendor assurance audits or indeed regulatory inspections. So what's been happening over the last couple of years? Of course, there are some companies, some of our clients have really done well. They're thriving, they're busy, their order books are full, and everything's rosy. Is that the majority of the people that we talk to? I don't think so. I think many of the firms that we're aware of and we work with have been hit really hard. You know, we continue to see a wide variety of supply chain interruptions, whether that's components, raw materials, packaging materials, active ingredients. You know, trying to get the right bill of materials at the right place in the world at the right time continues to be a real difficulty, you know, causing some significant drug shortages to the end users. We're also seeing a lot of staff-related issues, so people really struggling to fill key vacancies, particularly in the field of quality, particularly in the field of site engineering and operational leadership as well. We're also seeing, of course, staff turnover, and we're starting to see absence growing because of being pinged with an LFT or a PCR test that's failed, and obviously not being able to be at work for the duration of a key project. So we're starting to see people having to make some really tough value judgments taking some risk-based decisions based upon the resources that they've got, not necessarily on what is the right thing to do for the quality assurance of the end product. So some really tough decisions are having to be made because of the availability of staff. Needless to say, during this period, we've all seen a reduction in the amount of CapEx investment. So our legacy facilities continue to be legacy facilities. A lot of things that should have been upgraded, that were planned to be upgraded, have just really been shelved for the time being. But, you know, thankfully, happily, we can also report we're starting to see a small uptick in that as well in the future. Of course, we know as well that whenever budgets are tight, people are not available, resources are stretched, the first thing that often gets impacted is your staff development and training programs. Things get postponed, things get abbreviated. And because of that, we have a period of maybe 2 years where the SMEs in organizations have not grown, have not developed or become as influential as perhaps they could have done over that intervening period. So we're finding that people are now really hungry for education programs, hungry for getting developed into new roles. And of course, a variety of other change programs were postponed over this period. So it's been a really tough time for many firms. So how has this actually affected many of our firms in the pharma biotech world? Well, of course, the legacy facilities that were really ready for an upgrade, really ready for refurbishment or replacement, are now 2 years older, and they still don't comply with GMP. You know, we look at things like the installation of the new Udrelex Volume 4 Annex 1 for sterols manufacturing. There's some significant items in that new draft that firms have to consider, plan for, find the CapEx for, gain the CapEx approval for, and then invest in their facilities. And really that should have started 1 or 2 years ago, but we know many companies now that are really behind on this sort of program. We've also noticed as well with schedule adherence, there's a number of issues across the PQS that have just not kept up with the target completion dates. So typically, deviation investigation reports being held over for too long, maybe not being engaged with quickly enough or investigated thoroughly enough, and certainly in many cases not being completed in a timely manner. Kappa, you know, every time we find a deviation, an OOS, maybe a change control that leads to a detailed root cause analysis, there is some degree of correction, corrective action or preventive action that is needed. And we, of course, like the regulators, expect to put in place a target completion date. That has to be respected. But of course, with all of this turmoil, all of this churn within the industry, many of those target completion dates have been defaulted against, leading to maybe some known or even some unknown risks creeping into the production program. When you think of all the other types of commitments, documented commitments that you would expect to see in your pharmaceutical quality system, many of those reports now have either not been upgraded, not been done at all, or just parked and postponed for the future. And there's a half a dozen examples there of things that we're starting to see during both NSF remote audits and on-site audits, where firms are really struggling to meet their target completion dates, and all sorts of other backlogs have occurred during this period. So how do firms turn this round? How do they utilize the expertise that we have in NSF to turbocharge this kind of recovery, to work out ways of developing more robust or resilient systems that will take account of this type of turmoil when and if it ever occurs in the future? The difficulty, of course, for all of these companies that are going through this is that they're now having to make some value judgments, not necessarily the most objective decisions that needed to be made. Maybe sometimes firms are working out compromises that they wouldn't necessarily have even considered 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe not even risk assessed before, but are now being forced to make some really on-the-fly compromises in their pharmaceutical quality system. We see, of course, a lot of movement between departments, robbing Peter to pay Paul, moving budgets around, moving people around, taking people from one particular function to service what they believe is to be a higher priority function. And this can lead to some real difficulties as well, of course. You know, and these kinds of subjective decisions can cause some divisions, some stress, some cultural issues, some behavioural issues, and maybe not always give you the type of results that you expect to see. But fundamentally, this is all leading to both a reality and a perception that GMP deficiencies and product quality risks will bake into your overall system. So when you look at a typical life cycle of dealing with remediation, it's really very, very similar to any other situation in life. You know, when you think of life in a broader sense, the first thing you've got to do with any risk is discover it. An undiscovered risk is a pothole in the road that you just don't see. So, of course, the very first thing you need is a very good system for discovering risk. And, of course, in our industry, that is all around internal audit, QA oversight, Gemba walks, making sure you've got good vendor assurance systems, and making sure that your subject matter experts are out and away from laptop and out and away from emails, and actually, as far as possible, walking the job on the shop floor, looking for concerns and really resolving those issues before they become a crisis. So let's be clear, all of our pharmaceutical quality system has to be good at discovering issues in the first place. The human problem we have then, of course, is that once you've discovered that there's a significant issue, there is always this very human factor-related response of disbelief, of denial, of anger, of finger-pointing, of recriminations. And the best companies try to short-circuit that as much as possible. To eliminate it completely is very difficult, but you can short-circuit it and you can move out of that stage as quickly as possible. Because that is only a very negative place to be, and obviously wastes valuable time and resources and causes some of the politics that of course we don't like to see in our organisations. Often though, once people get through the disbelief and denial and recriminations, they go into a kind of stasis. Well, what do I do next? What should happen next? What do I need? Who can help me? And during that period, oftentimes firms get no further forward, but also get no further back. So the sooner they can then move on to acceptance and assess and evaluate the risks and begin to plan out what is needed, as long as they've gone through each of these stages in turn, in detail, the earlier stages like disbelief and stasis, as short as possible, the acceptance, evaluation and planning as detailed as possible, you can then get into fixing issues, executing actions, and verifying that those actions have been done well. And that's where you really want to be. You can short circuit this if you want. You can go straight from anger to execution if you wish. But I would really counsel against that. It may be the short-term reactive thing to do, but we see time and again when firms fail to go through acceptance, evaluation and planning and go straight from disbelief to execution, they find that they've been busy fools. They've done a lot of actions that have no effect. It doesn't actually improve the quality of the product. They feel good because they've ticked off a lot of things that have been done, but actually it didn't do what you wanted it to do. And you've wasted time. You're going to have to rework the project, redo or reiterate some of the documents because they just weren't thought through properly. So please, please, please think very hard about how you do the risk assessment and evaluation, how you do the planning, and how you derive your actions before you get into the execution stage. So what's happening from a regulatory agency point of view? What are they seeing? Well, of course, there's a huge backlog of inspections. And we all know, despite the successes of remote auditing, you know, it was the best game in town. It still is, to some degree, in many parts of the world, the best game in town. But there is a real desire to get back to face as soon as possible. When you're doing a regulatory inspection, you want to be able to see in first person terms the evidence that people have followed their policies and procedures. And you want to see that the fabric of the facility is what it should be. So there is a huge desire to get back out on the road, visiting factories and ensuring that systems are in place and you can see the actual evidence of those things in place. Now, depending on what really happens across the world with the cases of Omicron, we anticipate that in different parts of the world there is going to be a significant ramping up of regulatory inspections. And we anticipate as well, from all of the signals and information that we're getting, that there is going to be a need for increased regulatory enforcement over the next year to 18 months, which means more budgeted spend or unbudgeted spend, more GMP remediation programs, and more change to get back to where you need to be in line with the internationally recognized CGMP expectations. So what are these hot topics going to be? And the next half a dozen slides are really trying to give you an insight on where to spend your time, on discovery. The earlier you find these issues, the earlier you can start to address them and evaluate them. So it's convenient really to group the likely hot topics alongside the 6 parts of the quality system as defined by FDA's quality system inspection technique approach. So that's under their reference of 7356.002. So if you look on the fda.gov website and type in 7356.002 quality system inspection technique approach, you'll find these 6 systems and the approach for performing regulatory inspections. So taking each one in turn, what are they going to be really interested in? What are going to be the hot topics that you need to be aware of and prepare for? So on materials control, they're going to be very interested in looking at any short-dated or expired materials. During all of these supply chain issues, have you had to justify using either expired or short-dated materials in your production process? Have you short-circuited any of your incoming QC checks, or maybe had to enhance those because of the use of an unapproved or indeed an approved under conditional conditions supplier? Of course, many times as well with supply-related issues, there has been a need for far more storage capacity for work in progress. So there's been more shoring up of stocks around the factory. But have they been stored appropriately in the right temperature conditions to avoid mix-ups, and obviously ensuring that they are correctly labelled and status controlled? So many of these issues related to materials control are really around how you've approved your suppliers, how you perform ongoing vendor quality assurance, and how you make sure that your materials are suitable for the production process intended. When we look at manufacturing control, particularly for those firms that have taken on new products, maybe increase the outputs in their facilities, maybe sweat the assets more than what they've ever done before, we've really seen some evidence of overstretching those assets. So how are those assets actually controlled and managed? How do they make sure that the facilities themselves are appropriate for the new products? And how do they make sure that production, are phenomenally busy? Production staff over the last 2 years invariably have been phenomenally busy. How have they still contributed to the responsibilities and the expertise required around process deviations? Let's make sure that we are still using our subject matter experts, however busy they are, in the right areas. And how do we know that the right decisions have been made from input from all of these different people, some of whom have been incredibly busy. Of course, we see when people are busy, they're multitasking, they may be working long hours. There can sometimes be some real issues with good documentation practice, with data integrity, and the end-to-end data governance processes. Errors creeping. So let's make sure before that inspection that we look at all of the root causes of error and deviation, and specifically look at systems that are not working as well as they should be or are suboptimal, that are creating human error within the production process. When we think of packaging and labelling, again, we're seeing some real overstretching of those assets, and also a number of situations where the batch sizes have become much smaller, which means there are a lot more line clearances. When there's more line clearances, more strip down, more cleaning, more setups, sometimes those line clearance efforts can be defaulted or disrespected, and we see admixtures and line clearance failures. So over the last couple of years, if you've had any evidence of line clearance failures, either in cleaning verification failures or line clearance failures, they will certainly be a hot topic in your next inspection. We've also seen some value judgments being made on performing in-process checks, sometimes trying to reduce the number of in-process checks because of a lack of availability of staff. That's going to be a hot topic, and the way of justifying a reduction in IPCs can often be pretty difficult to justify. Of course, when you're working those packaging lines so much harder than they have before, what's the mean time between failure as that come down? The number of changeovers, has that created more breakdowns? When there's been breakdowns and repairs, have those burning periods actually created more risk as well? So being very clear on how your packaging and labelling equipment has worked, performed, how it's been maintained and calibrated and checked, and what kind of performance figures for re-inspection, relabelling and packaging defects is going to be a really hot topic for the future. In terms of the facilities and equipment and utilities themselves, of course, we have to really look at the condition and compliance of those legacy facilities. Can we justify continued use of legacy facilities, particularly those that are not in line with either current technology or available tech, or maybe not in line indeed with CGMP requirements? So how do we do our patient safety and product quality risk assessments to confirm that we can still use this equipment in the production process? Of course, not all old equipment is bad equipment. If it's well calibrated and it's well maintained and it's performing well, and you have some maybe online condition monitoring, old equipment can work great. But you just have to be sure that everything is performing as it should be and risks have not crept in during this difficult time, particularly if you've gone through degrees of change issues or indeed new product introduction. So what do I mean by that? So if you have a piece of equipment that has had a broken component, a key component, let's say a product contact component, for example, if you've not been able to source an identical part for that piece of equipment, and you've had to modify it or put in place an alternative product contact part, how do you know that that part is like for like? How do you know for sure that the lack of availability of the approved part and the replacement with an unapproved part has not led to increased production risk or product quality risk? Equally, of course, with all these changeovers, all of these new products that have been introduced or moved from one facility to another, how do we verify that there are no adulteration risks during product changeovers? In terms of quality control, of course, QA have been incredibly stretched and busy during this period. Have they still been able to provide sufficient oversight of QC, maybe in second-person checks or in review of original data. How in QC have they been able to engage with terminated analyses? So if something goes wrong and the analysis is terminated, do you have a justification for it? Do you have full data knowledge of what happened? Good traceability of the data. Do you have a reason for the terminated analysis, and do you keep all the data? So that you can be really clear that you've got a QC lab that is generating proper end-to-end data traceability. Of course, during this period when deviation investigations have been under pressure, we know for sure that the out of specification investigations will be under pressure too. So what kind of prevalence have you seen? What kind of investigation has been done? What root causes have been identified, and what CAPA has been put in place for that? In terms of quality management, of course, DI, data integrity, data governance is going to be a key theme for the future. We've mentioned the importance of defaulting, timeliness, and managing backlogs. We've talked about the oversight of the quality unit. And of course, we've talked about how important it is that the quality unit continues to have a presence on the shop floor. So the whole aspect of pharmaceutical quality systems to ICH Q10 will continue to be a massive priority for your future inspection. So when you're thinking about trying to get back into control, once you've discovered some of these issues and you've gone through your anger and denial and disbelief, and you've gone through your stasis and you're into acceptance, how do you then start to work out ways of fixing these issues? And here's some key tips. Of course, the first thing here is you've got to own it. It's our job. This is what we do. We are responsible for discovering and fixing issues. It's great to discover things, sometimes disappointing to discover things that you really wish it hadn't happened. But once you've discovered it, you've got to own it, and you've got to see it through to prevent it reoccurring. A key thing here is you've got to be realistic on what you can do in the time available with the resources available. And NSF can be incredibly helpful in adding bandwidth to your team, either operational, corporate, QA, QC, and making sure that the additional support that you bring in is value adding, not just for the immediate term in terms of fixing issues, but also in preventing them reoccurring. So choosing a firm like NSF, you get an awful lot of coaching, prevention, an awful lot of scaffolding that's put in place in your quality system to make sure that you don't need us in the future, that you actually become independent, self-governing, and obviously self-identifying in your issues in the future. So choosing the right additional support is really, really important. Of course, when you're looking at trying to fix these issues, it's very easy to get distracted with gossip, hearsay, institutional knowledge, quick perceptions, reactive perceptions. Data is king. Data will always be king. And having evidence, first-hand evidence and data to show what's going on has never been more crucial, because you don't have time to work on things that are not important. You don't have time to work on things that are not going to give you what you want in the future. You only have time to fix the issues in an objective and evidence-based way. So really concentrate on that. The next tip really is around timing in a way. Now, of course, I would always advocate that you've got to be CGMP ready. You've got to be inspection ready on a perpetual basis. But if you have had issues and you've now got a date for your next regulatory inspection, and you've got a finite amount of time for preparation, you're going to have to make some value judgments where you concentrate on the critical few items. You can't boil the ocean when you've got a very short period of time before a key inspection or audit. So concentrating on the critical few ensures that you really put a bridgehead together where your resources are concentrated in the right areas of your pharmaceutical quality system. So what would you concentrate on? Of course, adulteration. You've got to be able to prove during your inspection that there is no chemical, microbial, viral, or any other type of contamination in your product. You've got to prove the purity of the product in order to prove the safety and efficacy of the product. So focusing on adulteration risks is crucial. The second area is misbranding. So if you've actually claimed that your facility operates to a certain GMP standard, you have to prove it does. Otherwise, you're misbranding the product. If you say that your product is USP, EP, BP standard, you have to be able to prove it. Otherwise, again, you're misbranding the product. And of course, in every inspection, you've got to prove that the data that is being shown is a true and accurate representation of the truth. So ensuring that you've got data integrity systems in place is really important. Fundamentally, some firms will just rush into doing tasks because they want to be busy. They want to get a churn of tasks going through the factory as quickly as possible. But actually, I always advocate that it really takes some courage for the leadership team to just do this in a very careful, step-by-step way to ensure that you're doing the right things for the right reasons at the right time, utilizing the right people. And the best firms will set sail using a project charter. They'll make sure that it's very well communicated what is being done, for what reasons, with what resources, and that the recording and monitoring and verification process is well defined and has the right periodicity. So it's important to set sail with a charter. It's important to keep going. You can't stop once you start, and to keep checking in regularly to ensure that you're going in the right direction. And of course, if I was here sitting with Rachel Carmichael, one of my great colleagues at NSF, from all of her experience of being in the MHRA as an inspector, she would certainly say, never try to defend the indefensible. If something isn't right, and you know it isn't right, and you're already working on trying to fix it, don't try and defend something that isn't defendable. That's so, so important. And she would emphasize that and underline it several times. So I'm going to do that as well. Then, of course, there's a nice little toolkit here on the right that just gives you some key questions when you want to verify that you're moving in the right direction, that you're getting back into control. So you want to verify that everything that you do is actually in place, in use, and in control. So what does that mean? In place means, have I actually got the process properly defined? Is it in a procedure? Is it in a set of instructions? Is it clear? Is it error-free? Is it trying to avoid any ambiguity? And ultimately, for it to be in place, is it actually appropriate? Does it meet CGMP? How many times do I hear that a procedure has been written and nobody's actually verified that it meets the CGMP requirements, that people haven't gone through the exact sections and subsections of Udrillex Volume 4, of ICH, of WHO, of the Code of Federal Regulations to verify that that procedure is appropriate, that it fits and it's aligned to CGMP. There's no excuses for that. You have to do that every time. Then you want to check that it's actually in use. So is it clear? Is it understood? Are staff actually following it? Can you verify yourself, either with documents or with visual assessment, by observation, that staff are actually following that procedure in full? It's no good having a beautifully written procedure that nobody follows. So it's really important that you prove that the system that you've put in place, the procedure you've put in place, is actually being followed in full by your staff. And then finally, of course, you want to make sure it works. So is it giving you the desired outcomes? Is it effective? Is it maintaining a process? And is it actually improved the state that you were in previously? So a nice toolkit there for verifying that your key steps that you took are actually successful in bringing you back under control. So, in summary, life is changing, of course. Our priorities continue to swing. And the key thing here is that we have to keep an eye on those big impact items and try and avoid getting swamped. Keep focused on the adulteration risks, the misbranding risks, the data integrity risks, and keep thinking all the time, how do I invest in my staff? How do I invest in my subject matter experts? How can I delegate or pass on my knowledge to somebody else so that the bandwidth of knowledge broadens, that we have more people with more expertise impacting on our pharmaceutical quality system? It's not all with me, it's with the team around me. And that's really, really important. And if you can't do that quick enough, bring in a team. If you can't change the team enough, change the team. Bring in additional resources, expertise, ex-MHRA inspectors from NSF, ex-quality directors, QPs from NSF. These types of people can make a phenomenal difference to your GMP remediation program. Not just because they fix issues, they do that, but also they coach your staff, they encourage your staff, they grow confidence, and they make sure that your staff have that knowledge in the future to avoid getting into these kinds of situations in the future. Ultimately, of course, we're all getting good at this. We have to prepare to pivot, and we have to manage our resources and be agile without being too fearful of regret. Now, of course, everyone's got a PhD or 2020 sight in hindsight. It's very easy to criticize what happened in the past, but actually you've got to make the best decision at the time available with the best data, with the best people around you. So it's worth taking the time and not be too reactive or too isolated in those key decisions. Use the force around you and the force available to you from NSF. So fundamentally, it's about flexing resources and making sure that you've got the right people around in your team. So we've written a number of white papers and case studies, and we've performed videos and webinars on these subjects before. And you'll see that I've provided you with some links to these key resources. They're available free of charge on our NSF app, and they're also available, of course, on our website under the resources library. So please feel free to access these and get some more information. So I'm hoping that was useful to you. This is one of 4 webinars that we're preparing for you that are going to be available on a monthly basis. Mine was the kickoff, and the next 3 are going to really go into some pretty detailed specifics and case studies about how you can make sure you both prevent regulatory inspection issues, how you manage regulatory inspections better, and how you follow up and complete your remediation actions as well as you possibly can. So those series of 4 webinars are going to be really useful and be available to you over the next 4 months, with mine being the first one. So if you have any questions from this webinar, indeed any questions on anything across the full gamut of GMP, please feel free to contact me on my email address there. I'm always available to you, always love to chat, you know me, and I'll help you in any way I possibly can. So thanks very much. I hope that was of use, and take care of yourselves.